We're back. Yeah. We have a bit from the film, but you were going to tell us how you met Churchill once, or if...
Yes,
or when you met Churchill.
I never really knew him at all. I mean, I met him once or twice at lunch and once or twice at the House of Commons. Right. But he did come once to a premiere of a film. I think it was called Dulcimer Street in America, long time ago, just after the war. And Lady Churchill had a fund called the Aid to Russia Fund. And once I was at, if I may tell you a story about Lady Churchill. Sure. Once I was at a lunch, and I was sitting next to her. And I have a brother who's the controller of BBC television, and he writes books, has written books. And she asked me if he would be kind enough to sign a book for her, you see. So I said, kind enough, I mean, he'd be thrilled to death. So towards the end of the lunch, I plucked up courage, and I said, I wonder if perhaps I might ask you a favor. At this charity premiere that we went to, I had a photograph taken with yourself and Sir Winston. And I wondered perhaps whether you would sign it for me. So she said, yes, she'd be absolutely delighted. Mind you, she said, Winston is a different matter. She said, but I have evolved a technique. I put the photograph down by his place when he comes down to breakfast. And I say, Winston, would you sign that photograph? He completely ignores me. Next morning, I put the photograph by the place again, and I say, Winston, I asked you if you'd sign that photograph. And he just looks at it and grunts and gets on with his breakfast. So the third morning, I put the photograph by his breakfast again, and I say, Winston, I asked you to sign that photograph. If you don't sign it, you won't get a brandy before lunch, and of course he signs it.
That's very nice. She could control him by...
Oh, absolutely, yes. He absolutely adored her.
Gee, if the enemy knew that, they could have...
right, absolutely.
Cut off his brandy supply.
Yeah.
What part of his life will we see in this film clip?
This is when he's 19, when he's just succeeded in getting into Sandhurst at the third attempt. And he goes to ask his father if his father has heard. His father is the part played by Bob Shaw. And his father, at this time, is dying of syphilis. And he is slightly mentally unbalanced. And Winston, who only had, as he says, 3 or 4 conversations with his father in his entire life, had this very distressing and very unhappy interview, which was one of the last times that he ever spoke to him, when he tells him that, in fact, he's the greatest disappointment of his life. It's a rather sad occasion.
Gee, that sounds good. Let's not show it to them. Let's make them go to the film.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at it anyway. Here it comes. Was his mind beginning to unhinge then, Lord Randolph's, from syphilis?
Yes. Yeah. It's a frightening situation when one thinks about it now. I suppose it's not so different in England. We still have a fairly barbaric habit of sending our children off to school at the age of 7 and 8, which I absolutely loathe. But I mean, Winston went when he was 7. He then went to Harrow, and his mother and father never, ever visited him at any school. And he came home from the first school beaten to such an extent that he was very seriously ill. I mean, really nearly died. The man was...
You mean physically beaten?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Physically beaten. Wow. Extraordinary. I mean, you'd think that such a situation would result inevitably in a deprived child, you know, and yet this extraordinary man emerged.
Maybe having to do with that.
Well, it may well be. Yeah. It may well be. He was a fairly tough character, mind you, I mean, he was a fairly ruthless lad and very ambitious, but very amusing and immensely brave. There are 3 big action sequences. I mean, we used to have a paper at home called Boy's Own Paper. I don't know whether there's an equivalent in America, but I mean, if you talked about the activities and the adventures that a man had, and came through them unscathed, I mean, you'd say, well, forget it, I mean, it's a story that just could not happen, and yet it happened to this man.
His life was right out of Boys.
Oh.
What do you call it?
Boy's Own Paper.
Boy's Own Paper.
Yeah. I mean, he was in the last cavalry charge that the British Army was ever involved in, and actually charged with a saber at full gallop, you know, and
Like
yet
in the paintings.
That's right.
Yeah. Gee.
And yet at the same time, apart from just an election, as far as we were concerned, was the man who decided to press the button on the atom bomb, you know, as far as our country was concerned, which is an extraordinary bridge of time.
What a life.
Yeah.
I'm going to try again to see that film. Our local stations have a message. We'll be right back.